Dr. Jane Goodall, who passed away at the age of 91, lived a life so extraordinary that it reshaped not only the scientific world, but also the way ordinary people perceive animals, the environment, and even themselves. Her death, announced by the Jane Goodall Institute, has left the world mourning the loss of one of the most inspiring voices of our time. Yet, in her absence, the legacy she leaves behind continues to pulse with life in the forests of Tanzania, in classrooms filled with curious children across the globe, and in the countless hearts she touched through her words and her work. Hers is not a legacy that will fade, but one that will ripple outward for generations. Born in London on April 3, 1934, Jane's passion for animals was evident almost from the moment she could walk. Her childhood was filled with an insatiable curiosity about the natural world. At the age of just 4, she famously disappeared into her family's chicken coop, determined to find out how hens laid their eggs. While her mother frantically called the police to search for her missing daughter, Jane remained still, watching silently for 5 long hours until she witnessed the miracle of an egg being laid. When she finally emerged, her mother did not scold her but listened patiently to her detailed account of what she had seen. Jane would later recall this moment as pivotal. It taught her the importance of patient observation, and also gave her the encouragement of a parent who nurtured her curiosity instead of stifling it. She carried with her everywhere a stuffed toy chimpanzee named Jubilee, given to her by her father. Though others might have thought the toy frightening, Jane adored it, seeing in it a companion who represented her dream: to live one day among real animals in Africa. By the time she was a teenager, she was telling anyone who would listen that she wanted to go to Africa and study wildlife. For a young girl in post-war Britain with no university degree and limited means, it was a dream that sounded far-fetched. Yet Jane's determination never wavered. She left school at 18, worked as a secretary and a waitress, and saved every penny she could. In 1957, she finally seized an opportunity to travel to Kenya to visit a school friend. That trip altered the course of her life. She was introduced to the renowned paleoanthropologist Louis Leakey, then curator of the National Museum of Natural History in Nairobi. Leakey immediately recognized in Jane not only an unusual passion for animals, but also a gift for patience and observation. He hired her as his assistant, and soon after, he chose her for an even greater mission: to live in the forests of Tanzania and study chimpanzees in the wild. Leakey believed that such a study could reveal insights about early humans, but he wanted someone with a mind unclouded by conventional scientific training. Jane, with her open eyes and heart, was the perfect candidate. In 1960, Jane Goodall and her mother, Van, set up camp in Gombe Stream National Park, on the shores of Lake Tanganyika. What awaited her was no easy task. The chimpanzees fled at the sight of her, and for months she could only watch them from a distance, hearing their calls echoing through the forest but never being accepted into their world. Yet Jane persevered, wearing the same dull-colored clothes each day and moving slowly, patiently, with an unwavering determination to earn their trust. After 5 months of effort, a breakthrough came. A chimpanzee she named David Greybeard, along with another called Goliath, did not flee at her presence. They sat calmly in the sun, grooming themselves, allowing Jane to watch. Slowly, others followed suit, and she became part of their world. The moment that changed everything came soon after, when Jane observed David Greybeard stripping leaves off a twig and using it to extract termites from a mound. This discovery shattered the prevailing belief that humans were the only tool makers. When Leakey heard of it, he famously remarked, "Now we must redefine tool, redefine man, or accept chimpanzees as human." It was not just a scientific revelation, it was a profound cultural one. Jane Goodall had shown that the line between humans and other animals was far thinner than most had believed. Her observations over the years went beyond tool use. She documented the chimps' complex social structures, their capacity for affection, and their startling capacity for violence. She saw them share food, care tenderly for infants, and grieve for the loss of loved ones. But she also saw them wage brutal wars against rival groups, engaging in aggression that mirrored the darker sides of humanity. Her work painted a fuller, more nuanced picture of our closest relatives in the animal kingdom, challenging humans to reconsider their own nature. Her decision to give the chimps names rather than numbers was controversial among scientists at the time, who accused her of anthropomorphism. But Jane insisted she was not projecting human traits onto the animals. She was simply recognizing the individuality that was plainly there. David Greybeard, Flo, Fifi, and others became more than subjects of study. They became ambassadors for their species, helping the world see them as beings with personalities, emotions, and rights. Goodall's discoveries captured the imagination of the world. National Geographic filmed documentaries of her work, and her books, such as In the Shadow of Man, became bestsellers. Millions who had never set foot in Africa felt connected to the chimpanzees of Gombe, following their lives and dramas as if they were neighbors or family. When Flo, one of Jane's most beloved chimpanzees, died in 1972, the Sunday Times published an obituary, a remarkable moment that underscored how much Goodall had changed public perception of animals. But as the years passed, Jane saw a darker reality. The forests around Gombe were shrinking. Poaching, deforestation, and the bushmeat trade were threatening the very chimpanzees she had come to know so intimately. She realized that her mission could no longer be limited to scientific observation. She had to speak out, to fight for the protection of chimpanzees and their habitats. In 1977, she founded the Jane Goodall Institute, which would go on to support conservation and community-centered development projects across the globe. Recognizing that lasting change depended on the next generation, she launched Roots and Shoots in 1991, a youth-led program that has since spread to over 65 countries, empowering young people to take action for animals, people, and the environment. Jane's message was always one of hope, that even the smallest actions multiplied by millions could change the world. Her activism took her far from the quiet forests of Tanzania. She became a globetrotter, speaking at the United Nations, meeting world leaders, and tirelessly traveling on lecture tours. Even into her 90s, she showed no signs of slowing down, often joking that she spent more time on airplanes than at home. She spoke not only about chimpanzees, but also about climate change, deforestation, and the urgent need for humans to redefine their relationship with the planet. Tributes following her death poured in from around the world. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres called her legacy extraordinary for humanity and our planet. The International Animal Welfare Protection Coalition described her as a beacon of compassion for all life. President Joe Biden, who awarded her the Presidential Medal of Freedom earlier this year, praised her tireless commitment to conservation and her ability to inspire hope, even in the face of daunting global challenges. Ordinary people, too, took to social media to share stories of how Jane had inspired them. From children who once carried Jubilee dolls of their own, to scientists who credited her with sparking their careers, to activists who saw in her example the power of speaking truth with grace and persistence. Jane Goodall's influence also reached deep into popular culture. She was immortalized in films, documentaries, and even toys. Mattel released a Jane Goodall Barbie doll in 2022, complete with binoculars and a tiny David Greybeard. LEGO released a commemorative set the same year, showing her surrounded by chimpanzees in a miniature forest. These tributes were not trivial. They were a reflection of how deeply she had entered the global imagination, inspiring even children to see themselves as protectors of the natural world. What made Jane Goodall extraordinary was not only her scientific brilliance or her tireless activism, but her humanity. She spoke often of moments when chimpanzees showed her gestures of trust, a hand extended, an embrace, a look of recognition, that reminded her of the deep kinship between species. She insisted that science and compassion were not opposites but partners. Her message, distilled over decades, was simple but profound. We are not separate from nature, we are part of it, and our future depends on how we treat it. Her passing at 91 closes a remarkable chapter in human history, but her story will not end here. It lives on in the forests of Gombe, where the descendants of David Greybeard and Flo still roam. It lives on in the millions of young people who have joined Roots and Shoots, carrying forward her vision of a more compassionate and sustainable world. and it lives on in the countless individuals who, inspired by her words, have chosen to act with kindness toward animals, people, and the earth itself. Jane Goodall once said, "You cannot get through a single day without having an impact on the world around you. What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make." By that measure, she made an immeasurable difference. She taught us to look at animals not as resources but as fellow beings. She taught us to see the environment not as something distant, but as our shared home. And perhaps most importantly, she taught us that hope is not naive but necessary. That change begins with the courage of one person to believe it is possible. In mourning her death, the world also celebrates her life. A little girl with a stuffed chimpanzee named Jubilee grew up to become a woman who changed the world. Her voice, soft yet unshakable, will continue to echo in classrooms, in forests, and in the hearts of those who still believe, as she did, that every individual can make a difference. Jane Goodall has left us, but the story she began is far from over.